So, Alok, may I now invite you to introduce this book to the world?
Thank you, Partho. And first of all, congratulations and as well as a gratitude for starting this kind of a publishing house because it's not the run of the mill kind of thing, and yet you have ventured into a territory which for long has been, untouched. Uh, a deeper understanding of the feminine, of the myths and legends, parables in a deeper light, and of course from the deepest spiritual point of view, from a mystic point of view. So thank you for this wonderful initiative, not only about this book but books with a very different perspective, and I wish all the success and all grace be with this venture. So this book has a little history. How it started was I had read one of the passages from Swami Vivekananda, and it's actually part of the Tantra Sar, and where he says to worship uh, all women as Devi is true Tantra. So it touched me very deeply because normally we understand Tantra as associated with all kinds of ritualistic practices, and of course that's a very deep. In the book, I have covered those portions that what really is Devi worship, what is the Kundalini process, what is the Durga festival we celebrate every year. But this idea that Durga is, of course, those parts are there and she is there as the goddess, the great goddess. But Durga is also the indwelling feminine. And I used to, during the course of my conversations, I have several times referred to this as a little anecdote that when women enter, they are born, and when they enter the house after marriage in India, the usual refrain was that Lakshmi has come. When she's born, she's Lakshmi. And when she enters the house as a married woman, she's Lakshmi has come. And used to say this semi humorously, and still I say this. But if you don't treat Lakshmi the way you should, then she turns into Durga and Kali. So better be careful because they are the one feminine which manifests in so many ways, and it's something so beautiful about India that it has given us a very rich, many-sided understanding of life and creation, not just one side, one aspect, but a many-sided. And second thing which deeply inspired me with this book is that I observed that Sri Aurobindo, among many things that he ushered, one of the things that he ushered is the age of the feminine. So, while we know that there have been two approaches, the Vedantic and the Tantric, but it's the Vedanta which took precedence. So, the Purusha, Purusha, Purusha. So, Purusha, liberative action. And maybe, as the mother reflects in one of her early conversations, maybe that's the reason why, uh, there has been a kind of tilt toward the Purusha, the male dominance. But I think it's the time for the corrective because without the feminine stepping into the forefront of the human quest, uh, it's almost like an entire, in fact, the energy which goes behind in the background. So I saw that Shurbindo, among the many things he did, many wonderful things, we see that with regard to India, he established Durga as the soul of India. So we see first that it is the feminine which he brought into the forefront. And, this idea of India as motherland. So many countries are called as fatherland. So this idea was very, very beautiful. And then we see that in 1926, he places the mother in front to carry on the supramental evolution, and he steps in the background. And then we see that when he withdraws physically um, beyond the realm of our senses, he places in our hands Savitri, which is again we see that the tremendous epitome of feminine energy which he releases into the world. And I mentioned some of these legends: Savitri, Ganga, many other legends. And then it's very unfortunate that when we read all these stories are there. As a child, I used to be fascinated by. I mean, I read myths extensively, just out of fascination. But the feminine aspect has been rather in the background, and whenever it has been portrayed, it's portrayed as if the feminine is helpless. Sita is Abla, and Draupadi is to go through humiliation. But we fail to see the Shakti, the might of a woman. Draupadi brought down an empire, and Sita literally by her silence ensured that the entire Lanka will be devastated. I mean, I've seen the Sita story in a very different way, and I've narrated it here as well, and about Draupadi. So the entire outlook of woman as Abla, she needs a man, she needs somebody to depend upon. It's a myth which needs to be busted at some point of time, because India has worshipped the feminine. And I think of all the major religions in the world, India is the one religion which I must say proudly that Sanatan Dharma, it has celebrated and brought to the forefront the feminine energy, the Shakti. Without him, Shiva is Shava. So we see the dance of Kali on Shiva's breast. So many of these things which I used to observe, I would pen down. So as you said, the book was ready, but I should pen down for the joy. Swanta Sukhaya. And then the last thing which really inspired me to write was that in my life I came across, you meet several people, you meet men, women in different capacities, some as different forms of relations, some in workplaces, some as friends, some as mother, sisters. And in all of them, I used to feel some aspect of the Divine Mother, something which is there, and that aspect became very prominent. So even though there were many sides, I mean, no human being is one-sided, but I would see that aspect, and I would often wonder that, look here, this is the Divine Mother coming to me in this way. So that became a very fascinating personal journey. So I tried to weave all these aspects of my inner life and understanding through these stories. So it was also a tribute to the uh, feminine, which takes a human form, and we meet every day. So that the idea is we can take a relook at how we look at women. And this is different from the way people often talk about in India. It's true that women of late, at least in the last few hundred years, there has been a kind of they have gone into the background. But it is equally true that this is a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, even where there is a women liberation, woman is a pleasure object. She's used for advertisements and things like that. And I always wondered why this should be so. So woman as Shakti, she is not just a woman who is meant to, uh, give joy. Of course, she can give, but much more importantly, she is Shakti. She is the embodiment of the ultimate power. So this book is a result of that, and as you know, several parts. One part deals with the myths and legends, their background, how to understand them, how to decode them, because very often we have plenty of things we hear about myths and legends, from the most ridiculous to the superficially sublime. When I say superficially sublime, that they seem to be putting in a lot of mystic jargon, but without that deeper thread, connecting thread. And then, of course, there are the great female characters, which are the immortal ones, which are there, who have not taken apparently human birth, but they are like goddesses, Sati, uh, and Parvati, Radha. She may have taken a birth, but even from a mystic point of view, there's Ganga. So Shatrupa, the story of Manu and Shatrupa. So many of these stories about women who have apparently not taken a human birth, but they belong to the celestials, and yet they are wonderful in terms of what they convey. And then, of course, the two great women who, for me, are like epitome of what feminine energy can be. As a child, I was very much inspired by Sita and Draupadi, and very few people know that there is a whole Adhyatma Ramayana, which is how Sita saw Ramayana. So so I passingly brought in that element. So that how did Sita look at Rama? How did she look at Ravana? What was she doing when she went to Ashok? So this is one part, and Draupadi, how she literally brought down an empire, just like we have some of these stories. One of the famous one was Kanyakumari, and Kanyakumari legend also, And if I look at India, the whole map of India is, culturally, it's a formation, spiritual formation. India is not a just a piece of land, but a formation which the rishis had created through the 51 parts of Sati. If you look at the entire, where all we find the Sati, she almost, it's like a formation. She presides, that Shakti presides, and that Shakti is engaged in tapasya, yagna, so that she can be reborn as Parvati, the daughter of the Himalayas. So all these aspects are there. And then of course there are those who took a human birth. There is Gargi, there is Ahalya, the so much we hear about her, Anusuya, and how these women actually um, not only created their own life, strong life, Savitri, of course, but they are exemplary. I mean, I find very few examples in among the men who could be, that embody that greatness. So those aspects are also there, apart from these epics, two great epics. And at the end, the whole idea is to awaken us, inspire us to understand the feminine better, and this might tribute ultimately to the Divine Mother, uh, to whom all that I can say is I owe everything. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. And as an aside, at the end, before I conclude, I must tell you a small little thing that happened today. So, as is our way, my previous books also, whenever they were released, I took them to mother's home. And so, this book also, I took to mother's home along with writings in Savitri. And normally, the custom is that it's placed on mother's cot and then brought back and given with some flour, and it's a blessing. That has happened to my books, earlier books, and also other people's books. So how it is done. Today, something inspired the person who was there, and she asked me, "Can I keep it in mother's room permanently?" I said, "Can you?" Means it's a greatest blessing that I can ever imagine. That this book, which is looks at the Divine Mother and her manifestations, uh, finds a place there where the embodiment of the complete Mahashakti uh, dwelt. So this is the greatest. I can only say gratitude, and uh, maybe I'll close with some lines from Savitri. Uh, can I get the book which is there? Savitri is there. No, Savitri. I'll just read a little passage which I love, where Shravindo reveals to us in a very powerful passage about the Divine Mother. And this comes, that passage I think I mentioned here also, but I'll just read it from the original, where at the end of, as we know that Shakti takes a whole journey, and at the end he um, reaches the apex of the mind, and he is ready to go beyond. And at the apex of the mind, he discovers the Divine Mother as the World Mother, and he describes it thus: Kingdoms of the God and Godheads of the Greater Mind, page 276. But thought nor word can seize eternal truth. The whole world lives in a lonely ray of her sun. In our thinking's close and narrow lamplit house, the vanity of our shut mortal mind dreams that the chains of thought have made her ours. Her is the divine Shakti, who's dancing all about. I mean, we can look at all the patterns in creation and we can see the divine Shakti dancing through them. But only we play with our own brilliant bonds. Tying her down, it is ourselves we tie. To limit the Shaktis, to limit ourselves. This can be, this cannot be. But what is impossible to the divine Shakti, and the faith in man? In our hypnosis, by one luminous point, we see not what small figure of her we hold. We feel not her inspiring boundlessness. We share not her immortal liberty. Thus is it even with the seer and sage. For still the human limits the divine. Out of our thoughts we must leap up to sight, breathe her divine, illimitable air. Her simple, vast supremacy confess, dare to surrender to her absolute. Then the unmanifest reflects her form in the still mind as in a living glass. The timeless ray descends into our hearts and we are wrapped into eternity. For truth is wider, greater than her forms. A thousand icons they have made of her, and find her in the idols they adore. But she remains herself and infinite. So it's a tribute to the Divine Mother in a different way. And I think the coming of books like this, I'm sure any others. The very fact you have named your publishing house, I just noticed as Kali Printers, the printing, blowing
It's the
publishing house, and Kali Printers. So blue somehow reminded me also of Kali because it reminds me of Shyama and Shyama, deep blue, and Kali Printers. So again, I saw that as a happy um, coming together of events. That Kali is the divine mother who changes time. She's the Lord over Kala. So it's so wonderful, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you.
And may many hearts be inspired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey and Partha, for this enriching discussion. It is always great to hear from an author's thoughts and his viewpoints. On behalf of Blue One Inc., I thank you once again for your gracious presence and time. And to all those who joined us virtually today, we hope you enjoyed the launch and discussion. Thank you for sparing time on a Sunday evening. You can buy a personal copy of The Eternal Feminine from your nearest bookstore or on Amazon India. With this, we conclude today's session and look forward to hosting you for more. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.